Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Ontario Public Transit Association webinar series called Opta Live. Thank you to all of the sponsors who have helped Opta do a replacement for our annual conference, the Ontario Transportation Expo. For the second year in a row, we've been unable to get together. And so this Opta Live webinar series has made it possible to continue the learning and the sharing. As I said, these are sponsored webinars. They're not possible without the generous support of our business members. So I'd like to thank Lindy Norris and New Flyer Industries for helping us bring this diversity session to the Opta membership and beyond. Lindy, can I turn it over to you?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Karen, and thank you for having us here. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Opta Live with today's recorded session focused on sharing tangible lessons learned. In this case, hearing from TTC's very own Keisha Campbell on introducing a 10-point plan for diversity and inclusion at the TTC. If you're not already, please go ahead and put yourself on mute, please and thank you. Again, today's session is recorded, which means you have another opportunity to take it in again if you didn't quite get enough the first time. My name is Lindy Norris. I'm the Director of Marketing and Public Affairs for New Flyer and MCI, which are subsidiaries of NFI Group, one of the world's largest providers of mass mobility solutions, including buses and coaches, connected technology, infrastructure solutions, and workforce development. And this is all powered by 8,000 people in 9 countries around the world, with our largest footprint of people and facilities here in North America. Today, we are very proud sponsors of Opta Live and the important discussion we're going to be navigating today. And I'm joined by today's special guest, Keisha Campbell, TTC's inaugural Chief of Diversity and Culture. But most importantly, we join you as proud members of COMTO's newest chapter, Toronto and Region, which officially launched just 1 year ago. So over the next few minutes and before we jump into our discussion with Keisha, I'll briefly introduce our chapter, which was proudly co-founded by TTC and New Flyer in 2020, and the important work we're leading to advance diversity and inclusion in Canadian transportation. But first, I'd like to acknowledge a few very important milestones. First, October marks National Disability Employment Awareness Month. And this pays tribute to the accomplishments to the men, women, and people with disabilities whose work keeps the nation's economy strong, and by reaffirming their commitment to ensure equal opportunity for all citizens. Second, October also marks Women's History Month in Canada, which is an annual month-long celebration of the outstanding achievements of women throughout Canada's history. Women's History Month also includes International Day of the Girl on October 11th, and Persons Day on October 18th. And lastly, October also marks Latin American Heritage Month in recognition of the Latin American community's tremendous contribution to Canadian society. Hailing from all 20 Latin American countries, Canadians of Latin American origin make up a large and growing community in Canada. They enrich our national fabric with their diverse and vibrant cultures, cuisine, music, dance, and more. And members of the Latin American community play an important role in Canada's growth and prosperity, thanks to their entrepreneurial spirit. So, as you can tell, there are many points of reflection and celebration during the month of October, and it's a wonderful opportunity to acknowledge and celebrate the diversity across your workforces and teams. Now, on to a little more about COMTO before we jump into our discussion with Keisha. So COMTO, which stands for the Conference of Minority Transportation Officials, is a nonprofit organization founded in the US in 1971, which means this year it turns 50 years old. Its mission is to ensure opportunities and participation in transportation for minorities, and this includes veterans, people with disabilities, and disadvantaged business enterprises, or DBEs. Today, COMTO has over 30 chapters and 3,000 members, representing more than 3 million minorities. And through regular programming, COMTO and its 30+ chapters provide leadership training and professional development, scholarship and internship funding, advocacy and thought leadership, community outreach, networking, and much, much more. To be clear, COMTO welcomes people of every background as members. No matter your race or religion, your title, your role in transportation, everyone's voice is needed at the table if we're going to advance and support diversity together. And as the first Canadian chapter of COMTO, Toronto and Region welcomes members from across Canada, from coast to coast. Many of them, including our own Toronto and Region Chair, Annette Safarli, are on the line with us today. So again, feel free to drop your questions and comments right into the chat. So why is joining COMTO important? Because diversity moves the nation. And your participation illustrates a commitment to advancing diversity that sends a powerful message to employees, peers, and our Canadian industry as a whole. Together, we really are moving millions of people every day, and it's our responsibility to reflect the diversity of the communities we serve and ensure that every person has equal opportunity for success. So whether you're a student, a nonprofit, an organization, individual, DBE, academic, or a transit agency, you belong in our chapter. And lastly, I am thrilled to share that just recently, we started closing in on the 70-member milestone, and we've already collaborated with groups like CUTA, QTRIC, and Women in Transportation. The Toronto and Region chapter has led community outreach programs, including a fall backpack drive that just recently generated over 1,100 backpacks filled with supplies for marginalized communities hardest hit by the pandemic. We've hosted 10 separate learning and development events over the past year, virtually of course, addressing the most pressing issues across diversity and inclusion. And last December, we also undertook a Holiday Angels campaign, which helped 100 Indigenous families in the Greater Toronto region by providing food staples and grocery cards to them through the holidays. So we're really building momentum, and we hope you'll join us. So to learn more about COMTO Toronto and Region, you can head right over to COMTO torontoandregion.ca or just email us at comtotoregion@gmail.com. Or if you really just want to jump right into membership, head right to members.comtonational.org. Again, that's members.comtonational.org. And I should disclose that I am the membership chair of COMTO Toronto and Region, and this is why there will be many shameless plugs, so please join our chapter. We would absolutely love to have you. So now on to the most exciting part of our day. I'm very excited to share with you, just before I introduce Keisha, that 2 weeks ago, the Toronto and Region chapter was presented with an incredible honor. During the COMTO International Inaugural Awards, COMTO Toronto and Region was awarded the Emerging Chapter of the Year Award in recognition of its efforts, accomplishments, and its value to the community. And this was accomplished by many hands, brilliant brains, and tireless hours. And this again was all led by our chair, Annette Safarli. So thank you to everyone who has contributed their time and effort into making this chapter what it is today. Again, if you're interested, head to comtotorontoandregion.ca. So now the discussion is going to center around an individual already renowned for her accomplishments and her leadership in equity, diversity, and inclusion in the Canadian transit industry. I am thrilled to welcome Keisha Campbell, TTC's first Chief Diversity and Culture Officer, who joins us today to talk about TTC's 10-point action plan for diversity and inclusion, which I think is something everyone can lean into and learn more on, and to continue building dialogue around our industry as we look to advance diversity and inclusion. So just a little bit more about Keisha before we begin. She is responsible for the critical functions of human rights and investigations, diversity, fair inspection, and special constable complaints, as well as talent management at the TTC. This new group has an end-to-end accountability and will develop, lead, review, implement, and manage all policy programs and practices addressing anti-Black racism, diversity and inclusion, as well as recruitment and outreach. Keisha joined the TTC from TD Bank, where she held the position of Head of Diversity and Inclusion with Canadian Personal Banking. There, Keisha led, developed, implemented, and influenced a diversity and inclusion strategy for 26,000 employees across 7 regions in Canada, with 25 million customers in multiple communities. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in Economics from Western University, as well as educational qualifications in other areas such as industrial and labor relations and business and financial planning. She is also a current board member at large for the Canadian Mental Health Association. So no matter your title, position, or role, there's going to be something for everyone to take away from Keisha's talk today. And while she's speaking again, please do drop your comments and questions right into the chat. We're hoping to address them at the end, but we're absolutely honored to have her here today. So with that, let's get started. So, Keisha, in December 2020, TTC introduced its 10-point action plan and 5-year diversity and human rights plan, ultimately striving for responsiveness and reflection of the communities it serves in the workplace with TTC, as well as the passengers that ride public transit. Can you tell us a little bit more about the plan for those who are unfamiliar with it?
Thanks for that question, Lindy. So I'm going to do the obligatory. Can you hear me? Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So before I jump into the question, I'd like to just thank you for having me here today, making this event possible. I know there's been a lot of hands and hours put into organizing this event, and I want to say thank you to everyone who actually made it happen. So getting to your question around, the 10-point action plan. We had 10 immediate actions to build greater diversity at the TTC. And I'd say at the beginning, we thought about 4 stakeholders in building out that action plan. So specifically our employees, our riders, the communities we serve, and the external partners who continue to work with us in this work. And for those immediate actions, I won't go into every single one, but maybe I'll just speak a bit to the range we took for the 10-point action plan, because I know there's a lot more time for us to get into the details. Our range started from everything from structure for success, which was action item number 1. That was really building out our organizational structure, launching my role, really talking about learning from international leaders and saying with an external advisor, what did we need to actually develop a strategic approach to diversity and inclusion? Number 10, so when you think about that range, so, structure for success is in-house. But on the flip side of that, for number 10, we also talked about really what are the best practices out there in the industry? What are people like New Flyer doing? What are our friends in the States doing? What are our partners at the City of Toronto and others doing in terms of this work? And really for number 10, we focused on what are the best practices that we can bring in-house to make the TTC an even more inclusive organization. So again, we took a really specific and dedicated approach, and really structure for success was sort of how we stood up the unit and built out our plan. We used an external advisor to help us get it right. Again, thinking about what were some of the practices we needed to implement. We looked at a review of data and really said, what data do we need? Where are our gaps? What do we need to do going forward? And another item we'll talk about is what does recruitment look like as we think about our external plan? Again, wrapping that all with best practices at the core and looking internally and internationally for some of those best practices.
Thank you. That was very fulsome. Thank you very much for that detail. So that leads me right into the next 2 questions. So this will be a bit of a 2-part. How did TTC's executive team influence, communicate, and champion this initiative? And why was their involvement important for the rollout and implementation of it?
Okay, so for the first part of your question, I'd say what's been really critical for us at the TTC is the buy-in from our CEO. We have support from the top that is usually very critical in this work. Our leaders and the entire organization have mobilized to further this movement. And maybe what I'll do is speak to some examples, and that will sort of speak to the second part of your question. So if I was to dig deeper, our CEO and the board, because we are also accountable to the board, they led the development of our 10-point action plan. And really that structure for success came because we had buy-in from the board, buy-in from the CEO, and buy-in from our friends at the City of Toronto. When we think about championing and influencing that work, right, and bringing it into fruition, we think about governance. So how do we actually reinforce accountability? With the 10-point action plan, we also launched what we call a Women and Diversity Committee. And when we think about having all voices at the table to influence this work, that table is made up of frontline staff, senior executives, and middle management. And with governance in place, we also think about how do we amplify this work? Because, there's the fun things like the events that we observe every month, but there's also some of that systematic work that needs to be done in terms of structures. So we've really also focused on amplifying true communication. And we have an amazing communication team that works with us in partnership to make sure we highlight and are clear and concise in our messaging. And that messaging is always aligned to the commitments we made as part of the 10-point action plan. So all of this will only happen if you have buy-in from the top. So I'll end by saying that commitment we've had from Rick Larry, who is our CEO, the opportunities to speak with transit leaders like yourself. He's actually been on the road, I'd say, championing our cause with events at CUDA and Empire Club of Canada. Again, as we think about using communication as a vehicle to get buy-in, not just internally, but in the transit industry.
Absolutely. And I've certainly had the privilege of hearing Rick speak on this, and he is very passionate and certainly knowledgeable in this space. So it is not hard to believe that this is really being driven by every leader at TTC. And I've also experienced your communications team, and they too are very exceptional. So you've already started to answer my next question. You've touched on accountability. So walking the talk is a big part of advancing diversity. What is or was TTC's approach to budgeting and hiring in this respect?
Well, I'll maybe focus on walking the talk first, and my friends and my direct reports and Annette and others, they must know, or I hope they will confirm, I'm very action oriented. And I'm truly committed to this work, and I really do put people at the core of it. So when I say people, yes, our employees, but I also think about the public, because as public servants, we're accountable to the public, right? With my action-oriented mindset, I'm very focused on outcomes and the impact of the problems that we're looking to solve. So what does it look like for our employees? What's the end result for our riders? That drives everything that we do. And at the TTC, we do have what we call our corporate plan, which has 5 critical parts. So 2 pieces of our critical parts are focused on really innovating for the long term. And the second piece is enabling our employees to succeed. So with that, when I think about our framework for how we make budgeting decisions, our CFO works in tandem with myself to help us, one, define the problems we're trying to solve, and then identify the resources that will help us solve those problems. I believe it's the Boston Consulting Group, if I'm correct, that says, diversity drives innovation, but innovation drives profitability, et cetera, et cetera. So we have a group of, I would say, maybe 45% of our employees that have a minimum of 1 element of diversity. So with all these sort of variables coming to play, and with the partnership of our CEO and the framework of our corporate plan, we use that as our guiding principles when we're thinking about what do we fund, what's the impact, and again, what's our mandate with regards to our employees internally and our riders externally.
Absolutely. And I just really want to highlight something you just said for everybody that's joined us on the line. I haven't yet heard before of a chief diversity officer, or in your case, the chief diversity and culture officer, working directly with a CFO to not only do the budgeting, but frame the problem to then budget and address the challenge. So that I think is very unique and very powerful. And I'm really looking forward to coming to you with more questions over the years to continue learning from you in this respect. This is very fascinating. So,
yeah, and I'll just jump in and say one more thing to that point, Lindy. Because we are so aligned, it really made it easy for the board to approve, for our council to approve our ask, because we were really deliberate in what we were trying to achieve based on needs, right?
Absolutely. So this, I think you're approximately 1 year in since this 10-point plan was introduced. You've already shared some of the actions and referred to some of the committees formed, but what actions or accomplishments are top of mind since the plan has been undertaken?
So I would say I'd say I'm so proud of my team. I'm so proud of the TTC. I've been around for just over 6 months. This work, as you said, started about a year ago. And there's so many successes to speak to, but maybe I'll talk about a couple and then we can, dig a little bit deeper if you wanted to. So I told you about the structure for success and that being number one in our 10-point action plan. The development of my team, the development of our racial equity office, that all came out of the structure of success action plan. I have a net new department, which is the diversity department. That team is going from a team of 1, which was part of human rights, to its own standalone department. And that team will, in end state, will be about 15.
Wow.
I have about 50% of it hired right now, and then 3 active postings. So if anyone has a diversity skill set and they're looking to join the TTC, I might do a shameless plug there. When we think about data, so data is another commitment we made under the under the 10-point action plan. And with the formation of our diversity department, we actually released our racial equity impact assessment this year in Q2, just after I joined. Phase 2 is underway right now. A big part of phase 2 is consulting with the community. So we've been working on getting insights from our writers and how can we do better based on the findings of phase 1. We're working with the public, we're working with leadership to progress in terms of our data capabilities as well. And also really happy to say that in September, we launched our first diversity snapshot. I'm a big proponent of what gets measured gets done. And we made commitments to the public and to the board and to our employees. So now on a quarterly basis, we actually show our progress against that commitment. On the recruitment side, I'd say we made a bold commitment to say 4 in 10 and every woman 4 in 10 of our transit operators would be a woman. We actually halted hiring in our operator program in the midst of COVID. We reinitiated hiring in April, and now we're well on our way to exceeding that 4 in 10 target. So much so that we just had our first all-female operator training class last month. And hot off the press, we're looking at launching a mentoring program for that group as well. There's a lot, Lindy, that I could speak to. But if I want to stay on the recruitment piece a bit more, we've been really focusing on outreach. We did a trades event in September with over 1,000 registrants. Big component of those were women looking to get into the trades. And we continue to work with our friends in ACAT to make sure when we host an event, it's accessible. And we are actually getting great feedback, unsolicited feedback, speaking to how easy it is for those with all learning abilities and capabilities and abilities to be able to attend these events. So again, unsolicited feedback is always great. So there's a lot of work, and as we continue the conversation, I can speak to a lot of it. You called out COMTO getting recognized, but we also got recognized through CUDA for our Black History Month campaign this year. Do you want me to keep going? There's a lot of really great initiatives underway, and my team is actually working on packaging that so we can continue to be accountable to the public.
That is just incredible. If I were to summarize the last few minutes of what you said, all I'm hearing is action, 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 outreach, engagement, and by the way, we're hiring. So if anybody didn't catch that, Keisha's team is indeed hiring. And that is a perfect segue into my next set of questions, because I really wanted to lean in to the measurability and the data piece of that, because I think everybody on this call and everyone in our industry can agree, we all want to advance diversity and inclusion. But if we can't measure it right now, then we can't understand what's being improved. And so related to TTC's action plan are commitments to assess existing practices, review communications, deploy internal training, and data review, among many other actions, as we've heard. And one such action that we've discussed heavily within COMTO, Toronto, and region, and that I know TTC absolutely recognizes, as you've just said, is the need to measure your workforce. So many of us have heard the quote, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. And that certainly holds true for understanding, evolving, and advancing the workforce. So can you tell me more about how TTC's or what TTC's approach is to measuring its workforce demographics?
Definitely. So data's, well, first I'd say I haven't heard if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. So I may have to steal that one as well. But as I said, for me, it's really what gets measured gets done. And a big part of measurement is understanding current state. And that shows you if you're progressing, right? And this is a movement. This is a journey. This is not a one and done. So data helps us understand if there's actually change afoot. So currently, when you think about what we're doing on the data front and measuring our people, we have a few different initiatives underway. So on the new hire side, we currently connect with our new hires through a third party. And that connection is to understand of those who are joining our organization, what parts of their identity are they comfortable sharing? And that's anything from gender, race, sexuality, religion, etc. As you would imagine, this is a voluntary survey. And there's some work underway to operationalize that a little bit and increase participation, because I'd say some of our corporate functions participate at a higher rate than some of our frontline functions. So that's sort of our new hires. If I was to look at our existing employee group, the last time we have measured or done what I would normally call a self-ID campaign was in 2006. Yes, 15 years ago. So having a realistic picture of our workforce is important as we think about building programming, right, as well. So I'm a big fan of data. I think I've said that a few times. And in my career, I've sat in a lot of rooms and had to make the case for change, projects, priorities. And I found that data can be a friend when you're having uncomfortable conversations. It neutralizes things and it allows groups to focus on the opportunity at hand. And because of my approach to this work and the need to really understand current state, we're actually looking at what is the best measure for progress. And that snapshot that I just shared with you is sort of phase one, right? Showing our progress against actual commitments. And then phase two will be later on this year, us launching our own self-ID demographic survey, which is, as I said, 15 years overdue.
Well, I certainly hope that one day you might be willing to share that diversity snapshot. I think it's probably something that we could all learn a lot from. And it sounds like you are really making some good strides in terms of the measurability in your workforce. So my next question is, in comparison to the US, which has a rigorously defined and measured program for disadvantaged business enterprises, or what you might hear called DBES. This is a program managed by the Federal Transit Administration in the US, or the FTA. Canada is only just beginning its journey in committing to expanding diversity across agencies, private organizations, and suppliers through purposeful inclusion and support of DBEs in procurements. But it's a bit of a catch-22 right now in Canada. Today, our Canadian public transit industry does not yet have a standard for accrediting DBEs or setting annual goals for DBE spending in the industry. So this was a bit of a blue sky question. How do you think we can go about developing these programs, setting standards, and measuring our success as an industry?
And I love that you said it's a blue sky question, because I would say this is maybe one of the parts of our 10-point action plan. So number 8, we talk about procurement and equity-based procurement, and usually DBE, supplier diversity, et cetera, become a part of that narrative. We're in the earlier stages of formalizing that, I would say. So I can't put a big check mark on that one yet, but I can tell you a bit about how I'm thinking about principles and what we're considering internally. So when you think about DBEs, there's sort of 2 ways you can drive accountability. Are they diverse themselves, right? So that is, do they have a diverse workforce? Do they have a mandate related to hiring and promoting and recruiting? Is their board diverse, et cetera? So do they live and mirror the values of the TTC, right? Second thing you can consider from a guiding principles perspective, and I know, as all of us being experts in transit, accessibility is a great way to drive change on that part of the portfolio. So are your suppliers? So for example, you're looking at a technology program or a technology fix. Is that solution accessible? Is everyone able to use it? And do you have that embedded in your procurement practices? A third piece I'd say you could potentially consider is human rights. So, are they making an effort to provide opportunities to equity serving groups? How are they thinking about women in transit? How are they thinking about those with different abilities, customers, community, and our employees? That's a way you can maybe consider driving change. And then thirdly, what we're considering as we stand up this work is, what are some of the international best practices? So as I shared with you, I have my net new diversity department. Within that department, I have a racial equity office, which is focused on engagement, policy, accessibility, et cetera. That office for us will most likely go to our friends at Chicago Transit, COMTO, and others to see how they're solving that problem and maybe bring those best practices back as we look at our own DBE strategy or procurement strategy. So we're still in our infancy. It's one of the more complex matters in this part of the portfolio, but hopefully those considerations help others as they think about their strategy.
Absolutely. And we certainly are in the infancy of this. So I really appreciate your comments on it because we are so early in the process, and it's so important to talk about these things. And I think everybody on the call probably has a stake in the contribution and development of DBE standards. So you briefly referenced COMTO already, and in dialogue around equity, diversity, and inclusion, we're always urging the amplification of every voice at the table, because when you see it, you can become it. So TTC, alongside New Flyer, founded and launched the first Canadian and first international chapter of COMTO, which again stands for the Conference of Minority Transportation Officials, just about a year ago. So can you tell me why co-founding this chapter was so important to the TTC? And I say that acknowledging the passion and energy and support and amplification around COMTO Toronto region within the TTC. I see it, I feel it, I appreciate it. So can you articulate just a little bit why this is so important to TTC?
Yeah, for sure. So in the beginning, one of the questions you asked me was sort of, what's led to our success and how have we driven change given everything that's been accomplished over a year? I'd say similar to the change we've been able to make, COMTO really was the idea of our CEO as well. Rick is an American by birth and has spent a lot of time working in the US, and he worked with COMTO in the past at the MBTA. And personally, he saw the benefits, exactly as you said, Lindy, right? If you see it, you can become it. And in this industry, it's really important to have a safe space. So having the chapter in Toronto, a chapter driven by employees, working alongside with management, collaborating for change, he thought that the TTC can really lend a hand and be the first to form and launch a Canadian chapter. And as I think about, let's say our North Star, or, our corporate plan and the 5 critical paths. We're really committed to that, second bucket that we talk about, which is really all about enabling our employees to succeed. And sometimes when you're enabling, it doesn't always have to be in-house, right? We operate within a bigger industry, and COMTO is a great way for us to really lend value around the table and then actually benefit from everything that's happening. A big part of where we are in our journey at the TTC is related to modernization. We're talking about transforming and modernizing, and COMTO is seen as a way to do that. I'll also say, there's minority in that name, COMTO, right? And when you look at current state, as I shared with you, data is big for us. About 41% of our workforce is racialized. About 1% of our workforce is Indigenous, right? About 16% are women. And you made the plug at the beginning. You don't have to be a minority to be a part of COMTO. But if you are a minority and you want a space that is an avenue you can access. And when we think about providing programming for employees to succeed, providing the avenue for employees to succeed, COMTO seemed like a really good fit, a natural fit actually, based on what we see as our contribution to the industry.
Well, based on how the TTC has embraced COMTO, it certainly feels natural. And I've really personally enjoyed getting to know more of the team and being on this journey together. And there's several of our team members, respectively, on the TTC and New Flyer side of things that are also on the line. And that's so great to see. And so you referenced COMTO being something that modernizes things and advances it. And so especially in this space, I find myself saying we don't know what we don't know often when it comes to equity, diversity, and inclusion. And there are many organizations, including my own New Flyer, where we know we can improve, but we need the expertise of external people, resources, or teams to help identify and develop through those gap areas and analyses. So in terms of TTC's talent management, and I'm being mindful of time because we're very quickly barreling towards the last third of our session here. Can you tell me more about TTC's approach to talent management and the development of programs specifically to bridge the areas of weakness or opportunity in terms of workplace diversity?
That's a great question, because talent is a big part of solutioning for diversity and culture and inclusion. So with that, it's, again, I go back to what's that framework we use to decision our focuses as an organization, and that critical path about enabling our employees to succeed. There's sort of it's a bit of what's the word I'm looking for? There's a process in terms of when talent comes in the door, when they develop, and then when they decide to do it. Yes, pipeline. Thank you. I haven't had enough tea for today.
I got you.
But pipeline is such a huge part of planning for the future when you look at talent. And as I shared, for me, data and facts are really important. And my approach to understanding current state to decide what do we need to do on the talent front. I'd say based on data, and I believe this is known, we have about 16% representation of women, right? If you look at the industry, the transportation industry, our representation actually lags our peers. So when you think about talent, when you think about the productivity of diverse teams, when you think about diversity driving inclusion, inclusion driving transformation, you can't do this work without thinking about what do you have in your tool belt, what does your population look like, and that's why we made the commitment to hire more women. Yes, we could have done a broad stroke and say, you know what, I want to move the entire TTC population forward. But I really do believe, and Rick shares this view as well, in being specific and measured, right? So we can actually see if behaviors are changing, because this is not just about numbers, this is about behaviors, right? So as we think about the
Absolutely.
talent work that we had to do, we considered a few things. Um, Focusing on women first, given that we lagged our peers. We worked with our human rights team. Luckily enough, I do have that department under me. We reviewed the human rights code. We looked at our current recruitment processes. We looked at what are the high volume roles that can maybe make a difference in the organization. And that's where we landed on 4 and 10. Again, talent strategy driven by data, driven by our rank versus our peers, and really framed by a critical path, right? Which is really about enabling our employees to succeed and that transformation journey that we're on. So 4 and 10 for operators was sort of phase one. We were targeted, intentional, thorough. And even my outreach team, which forms a part of the talent department, their specific outreach focused on that mandate as well. And I'm happy, as I said, we're trending ahead of target. And because I do have this, I like the actions and measurable outcomes. When we launched that special operator program, we paired it with outreach. We have 4,000 women that we communicate to regularly, right? In terms of roles and information about the TTC. We've refined our requirements for what it takes to become an operator. Just as an example, as you think about talent, one of our processes, Lindy, said that you had to be employed within the last year, right? But if you're a mom that's away on maternity leave, that automatically removes you from the process of becoming an operator. So we had a very specific approach to really not just superficially talking about, hiring and inclusion and diversity, but really looking at our end-to-end processes and where do we make decisions that can maybe have a negative impact. So again, talent is not just end state, but how do you get to end state? And the last thing I would say in the how, we also knew that some people were making independent decisions about candidates. Now we have diverse hiring panels. So there's a collaboration that happens when we look at, making decisions about new family members for the TTC.
That's excellent. And that certainly is a proof point to bringing every voice to the table and thoughtfully, not just making hiring decisions, but reviewing the entire process and policy and every step in between. So that's some really powerful stuff that you're sharing. And I hope everyone on the line is enjoying Keisha's comments. I know that we're starting to close in on the end of our chat, and there's a really thoughtful question that I'd like to get to in a few minutes from you as well. So I'm going to lean into just the last few questions I have here. And this is something you've already touched on, and I'm hoping you can expand upon, Keisha. Something that New Flyer has come to strongly value and engage in is community-based partnerships. And examples of this are alive and in action through our community benefit framework, some of which is deployed in our Alabama community. So this is an approach that's long held by the TTC as well. So I'm hoping you can share more on community outreach that the TTC has undertaken over recent past and how this specifically has helped shape your policies and your people practices. And maybe as a secondary to that, what have some of the key learnings that have come out of that been?
Okay. Okay, so being mindful of time, I'll try to be not as long-winded with this one. So when we think about community outreach, Lindy, I would say there's sort of two approaches that we take. One approach is sort of from the rider's perspective, because we're very customer centric, we're safety first. So we really think about how do we get the voice of the rider in? And there's a structure within my team that supports community engagement from a rider perspective. And that occurs in my racial equity office. So much so that, that phase 2 of the consultation work that I told you is underway right now. It was
Mhm.
informed by data where we actually understood that some of our racialized riders had a differentiated experience when they were interacting with our fare inspectors. So we're digging deeper in that work. We're working with Dr. Watley and Dr. Uso Bempa with UFT, and that's sort of really focusing on bringing the voices to support the data, so quantitative and qualitative, so we can solve for our opportunities that exist on the rider piece. When you think about, our own employees and maybe new employees, that piece of outreach is led under my talent department. So we work with the City of Toronto to align to their mandates, as an example. So they have strategies around newcomers, they have strategies around youth, they have strategies around diverse citizens of Toronto. So we're actually building out our first ever 2022 outreach plan, because our stakeholders and those who want to connect with us and work in this space has ballooned, and resources being limited, I want us to be as specific as possible in terms of what we're going to achieve on the outreach side. And the second piece, when I think about our employees and potential employees, we know within Toronto anyways, there's a group that we call, their neighborhoods that are racialized, that have different socioeconomic backgrounds, are educated and passionate, and sit in across the city, and allow for us to have really great applicant pools based on some of the roles we have available. So we're actually including that mindset as we build out our 2022 outreach plan, because again, we move through the community, so we want to represent the communities.
Absolutely. And so what I'm hearing here, what perhaps, if I may summarize what you've just said, is to reach those in different communities or racialized communities, you need to use and leverage different paths of outreach and different partnerships and different community engagements to develop that talent pipeline. And it sounds like you are doing a lot in that space. So I think there's a lot from everybody to learn about this case study in terms of Keisha and her team's outreach in the Greater Toronto area. So we only have about 10 minutes left. And there's one question that I'd really like to get to. And again, if you have questions, please do drop them right into the chat. But this one was shared to you, Keisha, by Keith Sheardown. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. And he said, great presentation, Keisha. The transit industry has many work practices that pose barriers to those that want to enter, such as split shifts, hours of work, and lack of affordable childcare being just a few of them. Have you looked at what parts of the business are barriers to women and people of color? And if so, what have you done to alter these work practices thus far? And I think you've just touched on some of those. This was actually asked quite a few minutes ago, so I think you've shared on some of that. But if you want to expand on that, please do.
And was it Keith, Lindy?
Keith, correct.
Yeah. So Keith, thanks so much for the question. It's actually part of the work, right? Understanding where there's bias in the system, where processes limit people joining the TTC. So I would say that work is underway. Some of the things we're doing. So as I said, the way we're structured in TTC, I'm diversity and culture. So I have talent, I have recruitment, I have outreach, I have compensation, I have human rights, I have racial equity. I have, my mandate is huge. But what we also have is our chief people officer. So she and I basically speak every single day, multiple times. And what sits in her purview is labor relations, benefits, payroll, some of the operational sides of HR. And I know, because we've talked about it, there's some early stage work around the question I had was sort of, can we do a deep dive into the benefits and our processes, to speak to exactly what you just asked, Keith. Where do we have hurdles that are preventing great, talented individuals from working or progressing within the organization? I will say, as much as I like actions and I like check boxes, it's a bit of a, I'd say, hopefully by next year, with all the different pieces that we've identified, we'll have some tangible outcomes where we can make some change. But we're early days in kind of taking a deeper dive into our benefits and other processes within the organization. I hope that answers your question, Keith.
That was very detailed. Thank you very much. And I have not seen a subsequent follow-up question, so I think it did answer his question. So before we move into closing, I'm going to ask you another blue sky question, and I won't call it a rapid fire round because I only have one for you. When you look at the year ahead, considering everything that TTC has already put into place and your 10-point action plan and everything that's to come, what are you most excited about with the work that yourself and TTC is leading?
Okay, that is a blue sky question. So first of all, I'd say I am, I don't say it enough, maybe, but I'm incredibly proud of my team. I have a powerhouse of people who are passionate, they are thoughtful, they are deliberate, they are long-term public service employees who understand and believe in the importance of transit and how it can change and empower people. And I speak to my leaders, maybe for them, they may say too much, but we have I have a great team leading this work, and that has me excited, because you don't do this work without the people, right? This is not a Keisha mandate. This is not a Rick mandate. It actually is about, what I said at the jump, our people internally, and then the people who take our system, right? I'm just a tool, right? So I am incredibly proud and excited about the work we have underway. So that's what I will say first. The next thing I would say is, there's a lot of work to do. I'd say maybe over the next 2 to 5 years, like chunks of really big, meaningful work that can drive systemic change. It's not always the fancy stuff, but myself and the CFO, we've committed to continuing to have discussions about how we identify resources based on net new things that I've seen since I've been in the organization. And what has me excited is I have her support, and I continue to have the support of the TTC with Rick and the leadership team. So it's not exactly what I think you wanted, but for me, the people, the intention, the motivation in this work, that's 90% of the battle. And it's really great to know that I have a captive team of leaders on my team, and then a captive group of leaders as peers to move this work forward.
Well, it certainly sounds like, again, there's lots of passion from the top down. And I love that TTC has both the Chief Diversity and Culture Officer and the Chief People Officer roles, working very closely together with all other leaders in the organization. We just had a late breaking question, so I'll ask this one really quickly before we wrap up. How is this information and opportunities to help being presented to current employees? And that comes to you from Tamara.
Hi, Tamara. Good question. So I'd say I have some work to do in presenting my findings and the information to current employees. So we communicate initiatives and updates and progress continuously with our current employees. At year end for our board, we are actually going to go forward with what I'm calling a bit of a scorecard of all of the things we've achieved to date some of my learnings, and then what does the path forward look like for the TTC. I did ask Rick, I said, give me 6 months to kind of just understand current state, because I like to make informed decisions about, where our opportunities lie. So to answer your question, we communicate, share, inform, build knowledge weekly on topics related to diversity. We have in-market training right now and a campaign that's running until December 3rd, and that's upskilling all of our employees. And then when we think about the future, at our December board meeting, you'll get a bit more information on what's the future look like for the TTC.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I think that wraps up all of our questions for today. We only have a couple minutes left, so please join me in thanking Keisha Campbell so very much. Again, the inaugural Chief Diversity and Culture Officer at TTC, which is clearly leading the industry in the equity, diversity, and inclusion space. And Keisha, I think we're going to need to do this twice a year because there's certainly a lot of action happening around this. So this wraps today's Opta Live event. I want to thank you so much for making time to join us. I also want to let you know that COMTO Toronto and Region is hosting an event with WTS, Women in Transportation, on October 28th. It's coming up quickly. We're joining forces at the 2021 WTS Toronto Virtual Annual Conference called Emerging Stronger. So Yolanda Cole from the COMTO Toronto and Region will be a panelist. To find out more, visit the link in our chat. We're going to drop it in there right away. Again, that's the WTS event on October 28th. If you have any questions,
did we lose Lindy there right at the end? She's been a trooper doing this webinar from a hotel room as she's at a conference. So we were ready to jump right in. I think we'll be able to send some information out about the WTS session that Lindy is talking about. So happy to follow up with everyone on that. All registrants today will receive a follow-up email with the link to the recording from today. So we'll be sure to include all of Lindy's updates in that email. I'd like to repeat the thank you to Keisha and the TTC and New Flyer for making this event possible today. We'll look forward to doing this again. We'll be meeting in person at some point in time, and these topics, these diversity and inclusion topics, will be meat and potatoes for all sessions going forward. So Keisha, this is the first of many, I hope. Thank you, everyone. If we have Lindy back, Lindy, we've got a minute for you to finish off your sentence.
Oh, sorry about that. I held, you know what, it held up pretty well. All I was going to say is, if you're interested,
Yeah.
If you're interested in signing up to COMTO, then please do reach out to me. You can reach me at Lindy_Norris at newflyer.com. And finally, on behalf of Opta, TTC, COMTO, and New Flyer, all the best for a safe and wonderful fall season as the school year and the conference season plays out. We hope to see you again in person soon. Thanks again for joining us. Thank you so much, Karen.
Thank you, everyone. Take care. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you so much, everyone. Bye.
Bye now.